Oregon is not just a place on a map. It is 30 million acres of evergreen breath, a cold cathedral of fir and hemlock that swallows distance and bends sound. Since 1997, 240 people have stepped into those trees and never returned. Hikers and hunters, tourists and locals. That number sits on a spreadsheet somewhere, but in the forest it feels like a hush, like something remembering names. Tonight, we walk into that hush. 6 mysteries, each with evidence, but no answers. Put on your headphones, turn out the lights, and listen. Because once you hear what Oregon keeps, you won't hear the woods the same way again. It began, for our purposes, with a sound that should not exist. February 2016, Forest Grove, a small town tucked against the tree line. The air was clear and cold, the kind of night when breath turns into weather. Around 9:30 p.m., people along Gales Creek Road stepped outside without knowing why. Something tugged at them from the dark. Then it came sharp and metallic, a high, living tone, as if a giant flute had been carved from steel and played slightly off pitch. Others heard twisted metal under pressure, like a bridge cable singing a warning. NBC would later call it a broken violin through a loudspeaker. But nobody on that street reached for poetry. They reached for door locks. They called it terrifying. The scream lasted 10 seconds, maybe 20, and then fell away like a dropped blade. A minute later it returned, but from the opposite direction, as if the town were a stage and the sound had learned the exits. Windows trembled. Dogs barked and then hid. Porch lights clicked on in dominoes. Faces leaned into the dark, with phones held like talismans. The tone felt directional, almost surgical, cutting through the neighborhood and vanishing before anyone could point decisively at a fence line or a distant yard. It circled again, closer. It left again, farther. It made the streets feel both too small and too exposed. By midnight, Forest Grove looked like a field lab. Flashlights jittered through shrubs. Someone set a recorder on a mailbox and whispered to keep quiet. Teenagers chased echoes between cul-de-sacs. Parents called them back by name. A firefighter in a heavy coat stood still in the intersection, listening hard enough to hurt. The sound rolled in one more time, bright as a wire, and glided away into the trees. Over the next nights, the pattern held, if you could call it a pattern. Sometimes one scream, sometimes a dozen. Sometimes it arrived at dinner, sometimes just as people were drifting toward sleep. The strange part was not only how it moved, it was how it refused to be found. Walk toward it, and it shifted. Try to triangulate, and the angles betrayed you. Some said they heard it outside, and then, impossibly, inside felt it as a tremor in the ribs. One man told a neighbor it did not sound like it was crossing town. It sounded like town was being played. Forest Grove is the sort of place that keeps practical explanations close at hand. There are gas lines and water mains, transformers that hum on cold nights, mills and fans and sirens. There are pranksters. There are coyotes and freight trains and wind in metal things. People listed those options like prayers. Still, every time the scream returned and slid off again into the dark, those prayers felt like they were being said to the wrong church. By March, the story had escaped beyond the firs. Reporters arrived with cameras and theories. The town kept listening. The woods kept their answer. And if you ask the people who were there, they will tell you, the strangest part was not what they heard. It was the feeling that whatever made that sound had already heard them back. This was only an opening note. Sounds that do not map to sources. A forest that seems to learn. 6 cases we can point to, and none we can solve. If noise can act like a hunter, what waits above it in the sky? What, exactly, is choosing its path over Oregon's black pines? By day, Forest Grove became a grid of clipboards and questions. The fire department ran leak tests along gas lines. Public Works opened vault lids and traced water mains with the patience of surgeons. Police cruisers idled under sodium lamps, while officers listened for any hint of a generator, a siren test, a fan cycling up to speed. The Department of Forestry checked seismic and pressure sensors. Nothing in their network was misfiring or pinging out of range. If the town was an instrument, every string was plucked. None made that note. A physicist from Pacific University, Professor Andrew Dors, tried something elegant: plot the witness reports and let the map tell the story. In theory, a sound that directional should allow triangulation: 3 points, 3 angles, 1 probable origin. But the dots betrayed him. Some overlapped in ways that should have made the source obvious. Others contradicted each other, as if 2 different sirens were playing tag through the trees. The map refused to resolve. Like a photograph that would never sharpen. Dors admitted what everyone already suspected. Whatever this was, it did not behave like ordinary noise. An acoustic engineer, Tobin Cooley, examined recordings made on porches and phones. He noted the tone's surgical directionality, the kind of focused beam you would expect from a horn array or a purpose-built emitter. "It should be easy to trace," he said. "It surprises me that no one has been able to locate it. Directional sound is supposed to be a breadcrumb. It's in Forest Grove. It was a will-o'-the-wisp." For weeks, the town absorbed it. The scream arrived in bursts: 10 seconds, 20, and then the quiet yawned wider than before. Dogs learned to leave the couch and hide under beds. Windows trembled as if the frame itself resonated. Then, as quickly as it had announced itself, the thing receded. The official file closed on a line that sounded like a shrug. Undetermined mechanical origin. A phrase that means, in practice, we looked where we know how to look. But 9 years later, the story did not feel finished. In July 2025, journalist Chris Lidgate came back to Gales Creek Road to ask a simple question. Had it truly stopped? The answers he found were not neat. Residents said the sound never disappeared. It adapted. It visited less often, always at night, and never long enough to corner. A few people described feeling it more than hearing it, a pressure in the chest that lifted as the tone slid away. "The fire department still gets calls," they said, "but no one rolls trucks anymore." After this much time, what would they chase? The reasonable explanations clothed themselves and filed in. Hoaxers with a speaker on a truck. A failing transformer arcing under load. An industrial fan with a damaged blade. A pressure valve. A stuck siren. Each theory made sense until you put it against the facts. The reach of the sound across neighborhoods. The way it appeared from different bearings within minutes. The precision of its cut in the air, like a wire pulled taut. The way it seemed to move on purpose. Here's the part no one puts on the official line. Sound in cold, stable air travels far. Under a temperature inversion, the atmosphere can bend a tone back toward the ground like a curved mirror. In dense conifer stands, trunks turn into columns that scatter high frequencies and guide the low. All of that makes a town a hall. And yet even inside that science, Forest Grove remains wrong. Inversions do not lie about directionality. A fan does not learn a neighborhood. A hoax gets caught. Which leaves the troublesome thought: people return to late at night when the houses exhale and the roads go empty. Maybe it is not mechanical at all. Maybe the origin is not a thing that breaks, but a thing that decides. Maybe the sound is a product, not a malfunction. And if the ground can sing with its own mind, what about the sky above it? Because while Forest Grove waited for a culprit that never stood still, 2 pilots over the Coast Range saw red lights move with the same unnerving quality: intention. Controllers told them to divert around the unknowns. The tape ran for 44 minutes. The explanation ran out immediately. The woods had a voice. The air, as it turned out, had geometry. The first report came just after 9:00 p.m. December 7, 2024, when the Coast Range turned into a single black wall and the sky above it looked like ink. 2 commercial pilots, flying separate aircraft west of Eugene, keyed their mics within seconds of each other. Same bearing, same altitude band, same description that made radios go quiet. 3 red circular lights, rotating slowly in a triangle over the forest canopy. For a beat, controllers treated the call like a misread drones, probably, or ground glare. Then the lights moved. Not like aircraft. Not like anything built to love air. They carved arcs between altitudes, as if gravity were only a rumor. sprinting horizon to horizon, and stopping as if a hand had pressed pause. In the leaked transmission, you can hear the moment protocol breaks. A controller, voice clipped, says, "Unidentified traffic at your 1 of the clock." Maneuver around the object. Air traffic control does not speak that sentence unless a screen shows metal. Yet the radar returns arrived muddy, intermittent. There and not there, like something that understood the rhythm of sweeps and stepped between them. Both pilots confirmed visual contact. The lights rotated in formation, then collapsed inward as if the shape itself were breathing. A veteran with 20 years in the left seat later described the motion as not aerodynamic, but intentional flight as choice, not consequence. Minutes later, the formation streaked toward the Pacific and vanished beyond the fur-dark spine of Sioslaw National Forest. A 44-minute recording radio chatter, altitude calls, timestamps, would later be verified by local reporters. The FAA's entire public posture condensed into 2 words: investigation ongoing. December was not a stray flare. The summer of 2025 turned the Coast Range into a scoreboard. In August, residents from Coos Bay through Lincoln County watched bright red streaks carve lateral lines across the night, and then halt midair with no deceleration profile, hanging like embers that had changed their minds. That same month, military radar in Washington tracked unidentified targets drifting near the Oregon border for 6 long minutes before the returns went to snow. Hikers in the Gibaldi Mountains told the same story in a different key. Clusters of red lights hovering in silence just above the tree line, drifting against the wind like lanterns that refused the rules of weather. Explanations lined up and failed inspection. Drones, not with that sprint to stop behavior across miles, and not with a formation collapse that looked less like a pattern and more like a decision tree. Weather balloons. They do not pivot or hold position against crosswinds and then accelerate like a thrown knife. Satellite flares. Their geometry is predictable. These were not. Classified aircraft lives comfortably in rumor until you compare footprints. No engine signature, no thermal wake reported by crews, no sonic consequence. Absence becomes its own data set. Along the coast, fishermen added a detail nobody knew what to do with. After the December event, a few claimed the ocean held a dull red glow for minutes, as if the light sank and thinned inside the waves. The sensible counter is optics, marine haze, particulate lenses, a trick of the eye when cold air sits on warm water. But eyewitness accounts piled up against the tidy physics until the ledger felt unbalanced again. Here is the boundary between possibility and refusal. Air is not empty. It is a stack of moving glass. Inversions bend light and sound. Wind shears turn steady motion into zigzags. A triangle of lights can be 3 separate sources, or one source with 3 mouths. And yet, even with the atmosphere's bag of illusions, we return to the shape of the behavior, the way every report leans toward the same thesis. The Forest Grove scream suggested from the ground. This is not malfunction. This is intent. The controllers have released. No follow-up. The verified tape remains an anchor with no chain. Meanwhile, the reports continue red geometry over black pines, carving quiet above forests that already answer back at night. Because if the sky can move like a mind, what wakes beneath it to speak? When the wind dies in the Willamette, the trees begin to talk. The Willamette National Forest wears silence, the way mountains wear snow, layered, heavy, and patient. By day, the noise is honest. Wind combing needles, creeks combing stone, insects sewing at the edges of leaves. But after midnight, when the cold glues itself to bark and the valleys hold their breath, something else begins to speak. It is not the chatter of elk or the complaint of cougars. It is longer. Stranger, a call that seems to test the shape of the dark before it chooses a word. The first reports drifted in years ago, scattered and easy to ignore. Late-night hikers heard a drawn-out wail cross 2 ridgelines and thought, briefly, of sirens. Cabin owners woke at 3:00 a.m. to a sound like a whale turned inside out. A tone that curled down into the gut before it reached the ear. By 2018, the anecdotes had learned to rhyme. Same hours, same regions, same unnerving cadence. A Reddit user who lives near Blue River wrote in 2023 that it came twice in 3 months, always around the same time, always from just beyond the tree line. He knows the local voices: elk's bugle, coyote yip, cougar scream. This was not that. He described syllables, not words exactly, but the outline of them, like something trying a mouth it did not grow up with. In 2025, a researcher working a cluster of alleged Bigfoot reports east of there reported a different vocabulary, mouth pops and short clicks that moved around him as he cast a string of juvenile impressions in mud. "I was being watched," he wrote. The noises were not random. They came in sets 2, then 3, then a pause that felt like punctuation. The next morning, he cataloged what the night left behind: trees bent into arches, logs in uneasy triangles, limbs woven as if hands had been learning the trick. "It looks like communication," he said. And he said it the way you say a thing you can't prove and can't stop thinking about. The voices do not agree on a single costume. Sometimes they are deep bellows that roll through valleys like low thunder. Sometimes they are hard and wooden. Rhythm without voice, raps too strong, too widely spaced for woodpeckers, as if sticks were being used as letters. Then there are the screams that climb until they realize they are being heard and cut off mid-note, a breath caught on purpose. Wildlife biologists who've listened to resident recordings do not hear bears or cougars in the spectrum. The frequencies sit wrong. The pacing suggests deliberation. "If it is an animal," one wrote privately, "it is one we have not named yet. Here's the science the forest will allow. Sound travels differently where the air is cold and wet and the trees are tight. Low frequencies carry like water. High ones fracture on trunks and fern. A human voice rides mostly in the 85-255 hertzes, fundamental, with formants much higher. Elk sit higher when they bugle. Cougars scatter higher still when they scream." The recordings locals share float in a pocket that does not line up. Some fall toward infrasound, the kind that rattles panes and ribs without needing ears at all. Add temperature inversions, and a ridge can throw a voice a mile with no hint of where it started. That is the part physics can explain. The part it can't is why those calls seem to orbit campsites, why they halt the instant a headlamp blooms, why they mimic the rhythm of language without landing on it. The geography draws circles of its own. Blue River, Mount Hood's shoulders, the southern runs of the Willamette. People describe the same choreography. After midnight, the sounds pass once at a distance, then closer, then behind. By morning, tracks scallop the edges of clearings, small, upright, a sequence more than a stumble. One researcher cast 14 prints from a string of more than 100, the stride measuring bipedal and juvenile 3 individuals. He guessed moving together. The official response is a shrug in bureaucratic grammar, unverified auditory phenomena. No formal study, no budget. The forest does not submit grant proposals. So the locals do what people do when institutions stay quiet. They learn the patterns and try to sleep anyway. They keep their dogs inside on windless nights. They listen for the clicks and the raps and the half-words breathing in the black timber. And they agree on one thing, even when they disagree on everything else. It is not the volume that scares you, and it is that whatever is making those sounds wants you to hear it. The Willamette does not echo, it answers. And sometimes, after it answers, someone is simply gone. On Mount Hood, the trails are honest until they are not. Morning frost turns the duff to glass, ravines breathe out cold, and the timberline writes a clean horizon you can read from miles away. That is where 61-year-old Susan Lane Fournier set out with her 2 dogs, clipped leashes, bright against moss, into the salmon huckleberry wilderness, on a route she knew well enough to walk in memory. At 9:12 a.m., she texted her husband a photo. The dogs braced beside a ridge furred with green fog thin to gauze between trunks. That was the last thing she sent, the last time anyone heard from her without the forest speaking over the top. By nightfall, she had not returned. At 8:47 p.m., the call went out, and the mountain woke with searchlights. Clackamas County SAR built a lattice in the dark, helicopters sweeping infrared along spines and draws, drones knitting grid patterns over clear cuts and creek fans, ground teams running the switchbacks until their calves burned. Dogs trained to find the vanished searched for the living and the dead and found neither. No torn fabric, no dropped glove, no errant print sliding off trail into ferns. 4 days of motion, not a single answer. On November 27, the search stood down, all reasonable areas exhausted. Reasonable to whom? Susan was a checklist person, routes logged, emergency beacons standard, redundancies, tucked into redundancies. Friends called her meticulous. The mountain agreed. Her car waited at the trailhead, parked straight and locked. Keys missing. Searchers noted the passenger seat reclined, a detail that felt too human for a place that prefers larger forces. The GPS beacon she always carried was not in her pack at home or pinging anywhere in range. On the first night, a few witnesses heard faint barking high in the canyon. Teams ran to it and found nothing. On the second, rescuers reported a stranger complication, radio static that pulsed and faded across channels like a heartbeat, following them as they switched frequencies, then cutting to silence as cleanly as a knife through cloth. Susan's case lives inside a bigger page none of us like to turn. Since 1997, there are 240 official disappearances tucked into Oregon's timber. If you stack the pins on a map, a picture emerges that officials wave away and locals can't stop staring at, rings of absence circling Mount Hood, concentric ghosts inside roughly 40 miles. It is pattern without permission. Geometry, where there should be only terrain. 12 years earlier, and miles south, another absence began where vistas make promises they do not intend to keep. On August 9, 2012, 52-year-old photographer Ronald Allen M. stood on the ridge above Russell Lake and told his friends he would stay to catch the light. They went down. He did not follow. He was not green to the woods. His pack held 4 days of sense and skill. Tent, bag, food, medication, spare batteries, the small redundancies of someone who understands weather does not care about plans. Jurisdiction, however, cared too much. Lane County, Klamath County, and the Willamette National Forest shared the case, and, for almost a day, shared it to death. When teams finally moved, they swept for less than 4 hours. No helicopters, no cadaver dogs, no grid. Then the effort stopped, as what they did look at told its own quiet story. His car was towed without forensic work. His wallet and paycheck sat in the front seat, like placeholders for a life paused mid-errand. A hiker later reported vomit near the vehicle. No one collected it. His medication, essential and time-sensitive, should have left a shadow in pharmacy records. No trace was chased. The ridge remained in that suspended state peculiar to wilderness. Nothing happened there, except that everything did. Years accumulated the way lichen does. People occasionally reported flashes of color on that same overlook, a glint that folded itself away when approached. Volunteers, returning in 2018, found a single carabiner lodged in basalt, a stone's throw from the drop. The metal looked younger than it should have. Locals started calling the place Ohm's Edge, as if the air itself held a charge. In 2023, wildfire skinned part of Mount Jefferson's back and revealed a narrow footpath etched where no map to remembered one. The trail ran clean to the brink above Russell Lake and ended there. No switchback, no scramble, just a decision. Embedded at the lip, one tripod leg hammered into the rock like a punctuation mark, and then nothing. No camera, no pack, no Ron. If there is a through line between Susan and Ron, it is this: thresholds misbehaving. The edge of a canyon where radios stutter. The edge of a cliff where a trail declares an answer and then erases the question. Vanishings that cluster around borders, timberline to scree, ridge to void, map to blankness, as if the forest keeps its doors at the margins and opens them only when the human world looks the other way. And beyond those doors, the blue mouth of a lake waits. A boy runs ahead 30, maybe 60 feet, over a lipped rise. His father calls. The world does not call back. Crater Lake looks like a promise. Blue as a bottle flame, calm as a held breath. On October 6, 2006, at Rim Village, that promise flickered. 8-year-old Samuel "Sammy" Bulka stood with his father at the overlook, laughing at toy small cars edging the caldera. He let go of his father's hand and sprinted up a little rise. 50 feet, maybe 60. A ridge lip, a boy's joke, a call over the shoulder, and then nothing. His father followed the trail, expecting to catch him crouched behind a rock, expecting to scold and laugh and say, "Do not do that again." He found only sky and silence, and the cold idea that the earth can close without moving. The response was immediate and enormous. Rangers, county deputies, volunteers from 2 states. Helicopters traced circles over the crater's rim. Divers combed what little of the lake's skin they could. The rest falls almost 2,000 feet, a blue shaft beyond easy reach. Teams scoured the forest along Cleetwood Cove and beyond. No shoe prints, no thread, no bent twig that meant more than the thousands already bent by weather. Dogs ran heat and scent across pumice, across damp duff, across stone that keeps only the memory it wants. After 8 days, the search entered the tense vocabulary of official closure, rugged terrain, best efforts, tragedy. But Crater Lake's ledger already held other entries in that handwriting. The 1,970 seconds. Hikers who set out near Wizard Island and never returned. The 1,990 seconds. Campers waking to see blue spheres floating over the water, bleeding light without source, moving with the lake's breath and not with the wind. In 2007, a decomposed body surfaced near Cleetwood Cove after years gone. The water's cold. A ruthless archivist had banked the flesh like a library preserves paper. The lake does not tell its secrets. It shelves them. What turned Sammy's file from past tense to present was quiet and recent. In September 2025, Oregon and California agencies returned without fanfare. The phrasing inside the park's notice was the unusual part. Not recovery. Not closure. Hopeful. Search teams worked miles east of the original area, in forest labeled unstable, as if the terrain itself might mislead or change. No new public evidence. No new theory. Just the shape of an effort that looked like belief. Around the rim, the stories never stopped. Campers swore they heard laughter in the timber at dusk. A child's voice bright and thin with distance. The kind of sound that makes adults stand very still and consider whether to answer. In winters since, rangers have found small, bare prints stippling fresh snow toward the lake and stopping at the water's edge as cleanly as a sentence. People who patrol these paths long enough learn not to repeat what they hear on radios after midnight names, called by no one, static arranged like syllables, a single tone that lives too far down in the chest to be weather. Sammy's father once described him as curious, bright, easily overwhelmed, a mind that loved patterns. Asperger's makes the world loud. The forest can be a cathedral if you choose the pew. The original theory said he wandered and hid, but thermal optics and dogs argue with that story. The lake argues too, with its habit of keeping what falls and showing almost nothing that does not choose to surface. Which leaves the possibility nobody wants to say out loud. He went somewhere. Not down, not away. Somewhere. And when you widen the frame, the somewhere starts to rhyme with other edges. Susan's trail ends where radios pulse and stutter. Ron's footpath runs to a cliff and decides there is no more map. The Willamette speaks in clicks and half words, as if testing mouths. Overhead. Red geometry draws lines through air that should not allow it. In Forest Grove, the night learned a song and sang it back at anyone who dared to listen. 6 mysteries. 1 forest. A set of behaviors that look less like chaos and more like a system. Call it a perimeter. A set of doors. A willingness to answer when we tap on the glass. Oregon's forests are beautiful, but they are not empty. They hold sounds that dodge physics, lights that write choices across the sky, and disappearances that refuse to obey a calendar. People step in with radios and GPS and the comforts of procedure, and some are taken as if the woods close behind them and open somewhere else. If you have walked any of these trails, you know this. The trees are not just watching, they are listening. Which of these stories won't let you sleep? Which ridge would you never walk after sundown? Leave it in the comments. And if you ever hear the air start to sing, turn off the lights and wait. Listen close. Decide if it is a warning or an answer.